In this lecture, we're going to be learning how to paint a matte surface. So we're going to be using the same exact template that we used for the other two spheres so far. So what we want to do is we want to start with the highlight. So we're just going to be painting a brown or a gray ball, sorry. And we're just going to make this gray right here, we're going to make that the shadow because that's going to make it easier to paint in. So on this layer right here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select this gray, make it a little bit brighter, so maybe drag it up to there, and maybe over into the saturated area a little bit. It's a little bit brighter, a little bit more saturated, and I'm going to add a little bit of blue to it because this light is coming from the sky. So we want it to have a little bit of a cool color to it. And then using a soft-edged airbrush, we can go ahead and just paint in our highlight. Let's just paint it in something like that. And we want it up here towards the top because that's where the light source is. I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit of a lighter color, bring my brush size down a bit, and just add a little bit of a brighter highlight right there. Maybe I can brighten that up just a little bit more. All right, perfect. Now we're getting kind of this weird circle effect, so let's go in there and let's just use a smaller brush and let's kind of blend that in, kind of get rid of that. All right, next, let's go ahead and let's take this gray color. I'm just going to darken it just the tiniest bit and just add a little bit of a coarse shadow in here. And I'm actually going to take this all the way to the bottom. We're going to put our bounce light on a separate layer. Maybe I could darken that just a little bit more. Great. And then when we get down here into this area, we're going to start getting ambient occlusion. So I'm going to go ahead and bring my color down pretty dark. Just do a little bit of some darker shadow down there. Maybe I'll select a little bit of this and kind of bring it a little bit more towards the center. I'm going to grab all the way down to almost black and just do a pretty dark shadow right there, like that. And then maybe we can clean that up by coming back over with a little bit of gray. All right, perfect. Now let's go ahead and add a new layer. We'll drag that underneath so it automatically turns it into a clipping layer mask. Drag that back up to the top. And let's go ahead and paint in our bounce light. So first, let's paint in the bounce light from the table. So the bounce light is not going to appear right here in that area because that area has a shadow right underneath it. But out here on these sides, we're going to get some bounce light because it's going to be bouncing off these light areas of the table. So I'm going to go ahead and select one of these orange colors. And we just want to lightly paint in some bounce light, just the tiniest bit. So don't push too hard. Just keep them kind of transparent. Same with on this side. And if you paint out here further off the ball, the edges of your brush will kind of seep onto the area where the ball is. So that will help you kind of get a little bit of a lighter area. All right, great. Now let's go ahead and do the bounce light for the background. So you can see that we have this background back here that's green. Let's grab one of these mid-value greens, so maybe something like that. And we can just add a little bit of some light green around the edge, like that. I'll do the same thing on the other side. Let's zoom out and see how that looks. It's looking pretty good. I think the green is a little bit too much because the green is pretty far away, so we wouldn't be getting that much of a reflected light. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my erase tool, and I'm going to bring my opacity on my brush down to 30%, and I can just, and maybe that's a little bit too much. Go ahead and undo that. I'm going to bring it down to 20%. I'm going to take about 20% of that out, so it just becomes a little bit more transparent, a little bit softer. All right, I think that looks good. And then if we wanted to, we can also just overall bring the opacity down on that layer. So if your colors are looking too strong, if they're too opaque, you can just slide the opacity around and see where it looks good to you. Something like that I think looks good. And I think I'm actually going to grab just a little bit more of a saturated color here for these reflected orange areas. And those look too dark for a matte object. Matte objects, they don't reflect very much. That's what makes them matte. And so we don't want that much of a variation between the highlights and the shadows. And we also don't want our bounce lights to be too strong. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my eraser tool and I'm just going to erase those out at 20%, see how that looks, and then probably do another 20% erase on top of that, just to really soften that up. All right, but now that's looking a little bit more saturated. Let's go ahead and zoom out and see how it looks. It's looking pretty good. I think if we come back down to this layer, we could come in here to this ambient occlusion down here, and let's just kind of paint that in a little bit more across the bottom of the sphere. Then we want to blend that in more. And if we kind of hand blend some of these colors a little bit, it might just make it look a little bit nicer, a little bit more hand painted. Now let's zoom out and see how that looks. All right, I think that looks pretty dang good. All right, that brings us to the end of this lecture. So just remember when you're painting matte surfaces that the highlights and the shadows should not have too big of a difference in their values. There shouldn't be a ton of contrast. It should all be pretty close to each other. And you also shouldn't really have any reflections or anything like that on it if it's matte. Thanks for watching this lecture, and I'll see you guys in the next one.